Good day, friends, and welcome back to Conflicts of the Human Race. Today, I will tell you about the entire story of the War of 1815. Now buckle up as we begin. The young United States found itself caught between two warring European powers in the early 1800s. Britain's Royal Navy ruled the seas with an iron fist, stopping American merchant vessels and forcibly conscripting sailors into British service through the practice of impressment. Meanwhile, Napoleon's continental system sought to strangle British trade, and America's neutral commerce became a pawn in this global struggle. President Thomas Jefferson's embargo policies had already damaged American trade, but tensions continued to mount. British support for Native American resistance in the Northwest Territory further inflamed American sentiment. The war hawks in Congress, led by Henry Clay and John Calhoun, pushed for military action to defend American honor and expand territorial boundaries. On June 18, 1812, President James Madison signed the declaration of war against Great Britain, making this America's first declared war as a sovereign nation. The decision came after years of mounting grievances, but the vote in Congress was remarkably close, reflecting deep divisions within the country. New England merchants, who profited from trade despite British harassment, largely opposed the war. However, the South and West, represented by the war hawks, demanded action to defend American rights and seize British territories in Canada. The American military was woefully unprepared for conflict. The regular army numbered fewer than 7,000 men, scattered across vast frontiers. The Navy possessed only 16 seaworthy vessels compared to Britain's 600 warships. State militias were poorly trained and equipped, and many officers lacked combat experience. Despite these disadvantages, American leaders believed they could quickly conquer Canada, while Britain remained occupied fighting Napoleon in Europe. This optimism would soon face the harsh reality of warfare. The war's opening campaign targeted British Canada, with American forces planning a three-pronged invasion. General William Hull led the Northwestern Army from Detroit, while General Henry Dearborn commanded forces along Lake Champlain, and General Stephen Van Rensselaer prepared to cross the Niagara River. The strategy assumed that French Canadians would welcome American liberation from British rule, but this proved a fatal miscalculation. General Hull's invasion of Upper Canada began promisingly in July 1812, but soon deteriorated into disaster. British General Isaac Brock skillfully coordinated with Tecumseh's Confederacy of Native American warriors, creating a formidable alliance that would prove crucial throughout the conflict. Hull, overwhelmed by reports of Indian atrocities and fearing for his supply lines, retreated to Detroit. The psychological warfare employed by Brock and Tecumseh, including spreading rumors of massive Indian forces, completely demoralized the American commander. This retreat marked the beginning of a series of humiliating defeats that would characterize the war's first year. The Siege of Detroit in August 1812 became one of America's most embarrassing defeats. British General Isaac Brock, despite commanding fewer than 1,300 troops, brilliantly orchestrated a psychological campaign that convinced General Hull he faced overwhelming odds. Tecumseh's warriors, estimated at around 600, were marched repeatedly past American observation points to appear more numerous. Brock's demand for surrender included the ominous warning that he might not be able to control his Indian allies once fighting began, playing on American fears of frontier warfare. Hull, already demoralized and concerned about civilian safety, shocked his subordinates by raising the white flag on August 16, 1812. The surrender handed over not only Detroit, but the entire Michigan territory to the British. More than 25,000 American soldiers became prisoners of war, along with vast military supplies and artillery. This capitulation sent shockwaves throughout the United States, demonstrating the country's military weakness and encouraging British confidence. Hull was later court-martialed and sentenced to death, though President Madison commuted the sentence due to his Revolutionary War service. As disasters mounted on land, The American Navy surprised the world with stunning victories at sea. The USS Constitution, commanded by Captain Isaac Hull, encountered HMS Guerriere on August 19, 1812, in the Atlantic Ocean. The British expected an easy victory, given their naval supremacy, but American shipbuilding had produced vessels of exceptional strength and firepower. The Constitution's thick oak hull earned it the nickname Old Ironsides when British cannonballs bounced harmlessly off its sides. After a fierce 40-minute battle, the Guerriere was left a dismasted hulk, forcing its surrender. This victory electrified American morale and shocked British naval confidence. Captain Hull became a national hero, and the victory proved that American warships could match the Royal Navy in single combat. The success of the Constitution was followed by other naval victories, including the USS United States capturing HMS Macedonian and the USS Constitution defeating HMS Java. These victories demonstrated superior American seamanship, gunnery, and ship construction, providing much-needed hope during the dark early months of the war. The Battle of Queenston Heights on October 13, 1812, marked another early American failure, but also demonstrated the personal cost of war for British leadership. American forces under General Stephen Van Rensselaer attempted to cross the Niagara River and establish a foothold in Canada. The initial assault succeeded in capturing the heights, but British General Isaac Brock, the architect of Detroit's victory, led a countercharge to retake the position. An American sharpshooter's bullet struck Brock in the chest, killing him instantly and depriving Britain of one of its most capable commanders. Despite this loss, British forces and their Mohawk allies under Joseph Brant continued fighting fiercely. American reinforcements, consisting mainly of New York militia, refused to cross into Canada, claiming their service obligation only extended to defending American territory. This left the assault force isolated and vulnerable. The Americans eventually surrendered, with nearly 1,000 troops captured. The defeat effectively ended American offensive operations on the Niagara front for the remainder of 1812, highlighting the challenges of coordinating regular troops with reluctant militia forces. The year 1813 opened with American efforts to rebuild their military capabilities and launch new offensives. The disasters of 1812 had taught hard lessons about the importance of professional leadership, adequate supplies, and reliable troops. New generals replaced the failed commanders, and Congress authorized expansion of the regular army. The focus shifted to gaining control of Lake Erie, recognizing that naval supremacy on the Great Lakes was essential for any successful Canadian campaign. Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry received command of the Lake Erie Squadron, facing the enormous challenge of building a fleet in the wilderness. At Presque Isle, Pennsylvania, shipwrights constructed vessels from trees felled nearby, hauling cannons and supplies over primitive roads. The British similarly strengthened their Lake Erie Squadron under Commander Robert Barclay. Both sides understood that control of the lake would determine the fate of the Northwest Territory and the course of the war in that region. The stage was set for a decisive naval confrontation that would shift the war's momentum on the Great Lakes frontier. The Battle of Lake Erie on September 10, 1813, became one of America's most celebrated naval victories. Commodore Perry's fleet of 9 vessels met British Commander Barclay's 6 ships in a decisive engagement that lasted over 3 hours. Perry's flagship, the USS Lawrence, bore the brunt of British fire and was eventually rendered helpless, with most of its crew killed or wounded. In a moment of supreme courage, Perry transferred his flag to the USS Niagara, rowing through enemy fire in a small boat. From his new flagship, he broke the British line and poured devastating broadsides into the enemy vessels. The entire British squadron surrendered, marking the first time in history that an entire British naval squadron had capitulated. Perry's famous dispatch to General William Henry Harrison read, "We have met the enemy, and they are ours." This victory secured American control of Lake Erie, cut British supply lines to Detroit, and forced their evacuation of the Michigan Territory. The psychological impact was enormous, proving that American forces could achieve complete victory over their British counterparts when properly led and equipped. Following Perry's victory on Lake Erie, American forces launched a successful offensive into Upper Canada. General William Henry Harrison led approximately 45,000 troops across the lake, while British General Henry Proctor retreated with his forces and Tecumseh's warriors toward the Thames River. The British evacuation of Detroit restored American control over Michigan territory, but the greater prize lay in destroying the British Indian alliance that had dominated the northwest frontier. Harrison's pursuit culminated in the Battle of the Thames on October 5, 1813, near Moraviantown in Upper Canada. The British forces, demoralized by the retreat and vastly outnumbered, offered minimal resistance before Proctor fled the battlefield. The real fighting fell to Tecumseh's warriors, who fought with desperate courage knowing their cause hung in the balance. During the fierce combat, Tecumseh was killed, though his body was never definitively identified. His death effectively ended organized Native American resistance in the Northwest Territory, shattering the Confederacy he had spent years building. The victory secured the American frontier and eliminated the threat of British-supported Indian raids. The year 1814 brought a dramatic shift in the war's character as Napoleon's defeat in Europe freed British resources for the American conflict. With Wellington's veteran armies available, Britain planned a three-pronged offensive to end the war decisively. One army would invade from Canada via Lake Champlain, another would attack the Chesapeake region, and a third would strike at New Orleans. The Chesapeake campaign began in August 1814 when British forces under General Robert Ross landed in Maryland. American resistance proved ineffective as militia forces fled rather than face veteran British regulars. The British march on Washington proceeded virtually unopposed, with President Madison and government officials evacuating the capital. The psychological impact of foreign troops approaching the American capital for the first time since the Revolution sent shockwaves throughout the nation. General Ross's forces entered Washington on August 24, 1814, finding a largely abandoned city. In retaliation for the American burning of York, the British systematically torched government buildings, including the President's House and the Capitol. The burning of Washington represented the low point of American fortunes in the war. After burning Washington, the British fleet moved up the Chesapeake Bay to attack Baltimore, a vital port and privateering base. Fort McHenry, guarding Baltimore's harbor, became the focus of British attention. The bombardment began on September 13, 1814, with British ships pounding the star-shaped fort throughout the night. Major George Armistead commanded the fort's defense with approximately 1,000 men and 57 cannons. The British fired over 1,500 shells and rockets during the 25-hour bombardment, but the fort's earthworks absorbed most of the impact. Francis Scott Key, a Georgetown lawyer negotiating prisoner exchange aboard a British vessel, watched the bombardment anxiously through the night. When dawn broke on September 14, the sight of the enormous American flag still flying over the fort inspired him to pen the verses that became the Star-Spangled Banner. The successful defense of Fort McHenry marked a turning point in American morale. The British, unable to reduce the fort or enter Baltimore's harbor, abandoned their Chesapeake campaign and sailed away, leaving the city intact. While Baltimore celebrated its successful defense, British forces prepared their northern offensive from Canada. General Sir George Prevost commanded over 10,000 veteran troops, many fresh from Wellington's campaigns against Napoleon. The plan called for advancing down Lake Champlain, while the British fleet secured naval control, potentially cutting New England off from the rest of the United States. However, American Commodore Thomas MacDonough had spent months preparing his Lake Champlain squadron, anchoring his vessels in Plattsburgh Bay with springs on their cables that would allow them to rotate and bring fresh broadsides to bear. On September 11, 1814, the British naval squadron under Captain George Downey attacked MacDonough's fleet in a battle that lasted 2.5 hours. The confined waters of the bay negated British advantages in seamanship, turning the engagement into a brutal slugging match. Captain Downey was killed early in the action when an American cannonball struck his ship. Macdonough's tactical preparations proved decisive as his ships systematically disabled the British vessels. The entire British squadron surrendered, forcing General Prevost to retreat to Canada despite his overwhelming land superiority. The American victories at Baltimore and Lake Champlain significantly strengthened the United States' position in peace negotiations that had begun in Ghent, Belgium. British diplomats had initially demanded territorial concessions, including the creation of an independent Native American state in the Northwest Territory and American demilitarization of the Great Lakes. However, military failures and war weariness in Britain, combined with concerns about European stability after Napoleon's defeat, moderated British demands. The American negotiating team, including John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and Albert Gallatin, skillfully exploited Britain's desire to end the expensive conflict. Both nations faced domestic pressures to conclude the war. Britain's economy strained under decades of warfare, while New England's opposition to the war had grown so severe that some states threatened secession. The Hartford Convention, where Federalist delegates gathered to protest the war, alarmed both American and British leaders about the potential dissolution of the United States. These factors created momentum for a negotiated settlement that would essentially restore the pre-war status quo, with neither side gaining significant territorial advantages. While diplomats negotiated in Europe, the war's final and most decisive campaign unfolded in the American South. British forces, having abandoned their Chesapeake operations, sailed for the Gulf Coast with plans to capture New Orleans and control the Mississippi River. The expedition, commanded by General Edward Pakenham, included over 8,000 veteran troops and a powerful naval squadron. New Orleans represented a strategic prize beyond measure. Control of the city would strangle American commerce on the Mississippi and potentially detach the Western territories from the Union. General Andrew Jackson, commanding American forces in the region, had spent months preparing the city's defenses. His army comprised a unique mixture of regular troops, militia, free blacks, pirates led by Jean Lafitte, and volunteers from Tennessee and Kentucky. Jackson imposed martial law on New Orleans and constructed formidable earthworks south of the city. The British landed in Louisiana in December 1814, beginning a series of preliminary engagements as they maneuvered toward their objective. Jackson's aggressive tactics disrupted British plans, forcing them to assault prepared positions rather than achieving the quick victory they had anticipated. The Battle of New Orleans on January 8, 1815, became the most lopsided victory in American military history. General Pakenham's assault began at dawn with over 5,000 British troops advancing across open ground toward Jackson's prepared positions. The American earthworks, known as the Rodriguez Canal Line, bristled with artillery and protected nearly 4,000 defenders. Jackson's forces included expert marksmen from Tennessee and Kentucky, whose accurate rifle fire devastated British formations. The attacking columns faced withering fire from multiple directions as they struggled through swampy terrain and obstacles. General Pakenham was killed leading his troops, along with 2 other British generals, while their formations dissolved under the murderous fire. The battle lasted less than 30 minutes, with British casualties exceeding 2,000 killed and wounded compared to fewer than 100 American losses. The overwhelming victory made Andrew Jackson a national hero and restored American confidence after years of military disappointments. The battle's irony lay in its timing. The Treaty of Ghent had been signed 2 weeks earlier, though news had not yet crossed the Atlantic. News of Jackson's victory reached Washington in February 1815, just as reports arrived of the peace treaty signed at Ghent on December 24, 1814. The Treaty of Ghent essentially restored the status quo ante bellum, with both sides returning conquered territories and resuming pre-war boundaries. Neither Britain nor America achieved their original war aims the United States failed to conquer Canada, while Britain abandoned demands for territorial concessions and a Native American buffer state. The treaty established commissions to resolve boundary disputes and promised both nations would work to end the slave trade. Impressment, one of the war's original causes, was not mentioned in the treaty, as the end of the Napoleonic Wars had made the issue moot. The Senate ratified the treaty unanimously on February 17, 1815, officially ending America's second conflict with Britain. The war's conclusion came with mixed results. The United States had avoided dismemberment and successfully defended its independence, while Britain achieved its primary goal of preventing American expansion into Canada. Both nations were exhausted by the conflict and eager to restore profitable trade relationships. The War of 1812's end marked a fundamental transformation in American national consciousness and international standing. Despite the mixed military record, Americans celebrated the conflict as a second war of independence that had proven their nation's permanence on the world stage. The successful defense against British invasion, combined with victories like New Orleans and Lake Erie, fostered a new spirit of national confidence and unity. The war effectively ended the Federalist Party, whose opposition to the conflict and association with the Hartford Convention branded them as unpatriotic. Regional differences that had dominated early American politics began to fade as shared wartime experiences created stronger national bonds. The conflict also accelerated American economic independence from Britain, as wartime disruptions had forced the development of domestic manufacturing. New England's textile mills and Pennsylvania's iron foundries expanded rapidly to meet wartime needs, laying foundations for future industrial growth. The war demonstrated that the United States could survive major international conflicts and emerge strengthened rather than weakened. This newfound confidence would fuel the expansionist spirit that characterized the following decades of American history. The war's aftermath brought significant changes to American military policy and continental relationships. The conflict had exposed serious deficiencies in American defense capabilities, leading Congress to authorize a larger peacetime army and begin construction of coastal fortifications. The experience of fighting without adequate roads, supplies, or communications prompted major infrastructure investments, including the National Road and improved military logistics systems. Relations with Native American tribes underwent permanent transformation, as the war had effectively ended British support for Indian resistance east of the Mississippi River. Tecumseh's death and the collapse of his Confederacy opened vast territories for American settlement, accelerating westward expansion. The British, meanwhile, abandoned their policy of supporting Native American allies against American expansion, recognizing that such support was incompatible with peaceful relations with their former colonies. Canada emerged from the conflict with a stronger sense of identity, separate from both Britain and the United States, having successfully resisted American invasion. The war's end also restored profitable trade between Britain and America, with both nations recognizing their economic interdependence despite political differences. The War of 1812 produced lasting heroes and legends that would shape American memory for generations. Andrew Jackson's rise to national prominence began with his New Orleans victory, launching a political career that would culminate in the presidency. Naval heroes like Oliver Hazard Perry, Isaac Hull, and Stephen Decatur became celebrated figures whose exploits inspired future generations of American sailors. The war also created powerful symbols of national identity, including Francis Scott Key's Star-Spangled Banner, which captured the resilience and determination Americans had shown in their darkest hours. The successful defense of Fort McHenry became a metaphor for American perseverance, while the burning and rebuilding of Washington demonstrated the nation's ability to recover from devastating setbacks. Perhaps most importantly, the war established the principle that the United States would not be treated as a junior partner in international affairs. The conflict's veterans went on to lead American expansion westward, bringing with them the confidence gained from having faced and defeated European professional armies. The war's legacy influenced American foreign policy throughout the 19th century, establishing patterns of territorial expansion and hemispheric assertiveness that would define the nation's rise to global power. The War of 1812 concluded as a conflict that neither side decisively won, but that fundamentally changed both nations involved. For the United States, the war served as a crucial test of the young republic's viability, proving that democratic institutions could survive major international conflicts. The experience of fighting a second war against Britain finally severed the psychological bonds that had tied many Americans to their former colonial master. The conflict fostered national unity, economic independence, and continental expansion that would define the next phase of American development. For Britain, the war demonstrated the costs of maintaining hostile relations with America and led to the long period of peaceful coexistence that would benefit both nations economically. The war's end marked the beginning of the era of good feelings in American politics and set the stage for the Monroe Doctrine's assertion of American hemispheric leadership. While the immediate military results were inconclusive, the war's broader impact on American national character and international standing proved profound and lasting. The United States emerged from the conflict as a confident, unified nation ready to pursue its continental destiny. If you liked today's story, make sure to check out our other videos on our channel. Have a nice day.